So, if you guys recall, way back when, 4 years ago, literally 4 years ago, CIG started work on rescue transport missions. And I'll read the description for this. Taking advantage of AI follow behaviors to create missions where players transport customers from one location to another, along with prototype missions where players must rescue imperiled clients from dangerous situations and escort them to safety. Chat was so young 4 years ago. Yeah. So obviously, and we talked about this just a little while ago when we were reading the monthly report, taking advantage of AI follow behaviors to create missions where players must transport customers from one location to another. So the 4 years ago, they're still trying to get this to work right, and with the AI tech. But they wanted to have these missions in so that way you could fly down somewhere and you could go and find an AI and tell them to follow you, and the AI would follow you back and get on your ship and take a seat, and you'd be able to take them somewhere and land, and they'd get off your ship. Well, obviously, due to the breaking and no longer working of the NPC dropship reinforcements, that wouldn't work. If the NPCs can't walk off a ship onto a navigation mesh because of the navigation link system, they wouldn't be able to walk onto that same ship from that navigation mesh. They wouldn't be able to detect that there's a ramp that they can walk on and then see that usable, which is a seat. And so that's part of why these missions didn't go any farther, is they were trying, like, these behaviors are in, they work for an NPC to use a chair to detect a chair. But the navigation linking system is still in development because it needs to be a holistic system rather than having, okay, this is the system that allows them to go from a navigation mesh to go onto a ship and then walk around and navigate a ship and find a usable, like sit on a chair. And this is the one that allows them to walk through a door out onto a surface. And this is the one that allows them to get on a tram at one location, then get off at another tram in a city. It needs to be a holistic system that works for any instance where the NPC has to pathfind as part of their behavior from one location to another via some sort of transition. I was just the troop in the back of every helo. They always stress that you do not want to become the grounding connection. Yeah, you don't want to be the grounding connection for anything. Nope, that's a bad thing. But the amount of energy transmitted by a lightning strike to an aircraft, it's not so much about you, it's about the aircraft systems and them continuing to do what they're supposed to do. And there's only so much you can do to harden against that much voltage, amperage, I don't know, within a small aircraft. So that's part of the reason that the rescue transport missions didn't go anywhere, because they say rescue rescue, but also transport missions. It's part of the reason that we need. If you go into the hangars right now, you can see that there's a personnel entrance within the hangar. It's already set up with a door and everything for you to be able to take a personnel transport mission, and you take the mission and you call up the appropriate ship, and you'd have to do something to signal the NPCs to come walking out of that personnel transport door and then walk over to your ship and then get on board and take a seat. But they have to have that working for these missions to work. Are we getting reworked to hangars for modularity? For modularity for the hangars to add hangar modules, or are you talking about ship modularity? What do you mean? Back when I don't know if it's a rework to the hangars or what, because like right now, if you use your tractor beam, you can actually lock onto the freight elevator. It's its own entity within the hangar. It's a physicalized thing, and so for like right now, I don't know how they're going to make that work so that way you can customize your hangars. Because I think what they said is they didn't want to change the size of the hangars. It allowed you to make them bigger and everything like that, but to use some of those spaces and customize them to your own ends. And so if they can add the freight elevator and add that as an entity, they can do that for the different modules that they'd want to add, as well as to make it an entity that allows for NPCs to come and go from the personnel space. But I think it's more going to be you have a large space here, a medium space here, a small space here, blah, blah, blah. And you can say, I want this module here, this module here. But I don't think you're going to be able to, they did say that you're not going to have the hangar sizes scale. But they do say, so along with prototype missions where a player must rescue imperiled clients from dangerous situations and escort them to safety. Now that's those are some weasel words. That's very nebulous. But that does give you an idea of what their intent is. Imperiled clients. Now it doesn't say anything about rescue or medical. It just says that they are imperiled. So they are trapped behind a locked door or a broken door in a crashed ship. They are down in a hole in a cave somewhere. They are, on the other side of a corridor in a building, and the building's on fire. They are under attack, and you have to go and kill the bad guys, and then bring them on your ship, and then take them back to wherever they want to go. And then they get off, and mission complete. The delivery of the person satisfies the mission, just like delivering of cargo in a freight elevator. So that's kind of what they're going for with the rescue missions. But part of the reason that they didn't continue to work on this is because they had more work to do on the tech, and we talked about that. But also because with the features that they are developing right now, there's a lot more that they can do with these missions in order to make them more engaging for players and to make them a lot more interesting. And so if you think about that from one perspective is the like I talked about earlier, the ghillie missions. The ghillie missions are, you've got multiple phases. Things get triggered by you accomplishing doing certain things or doing certain tasks. And you have interaction with ghillie. Ghillie updates you throughout the mission. Pardon me. As you go with more information, more context to help you with the next phase of the mission. And I think that's sort of like the baseline for their missions going forward, even their sort of generic missions going forward, is they want things to utilize this modular mission system, to utilize comms calls and voice acting and stuff as much as possible to immerse you, but also to provide information, to provide context, to help with the flow of the mission, but also to deliver tension, to help you feel engaged. And so that's a big part of what could make a search and rescue mission really exciting, is interacting with a dispatcher as you progress through these missions. So let's go ahead. Well, I'm going to pause the music for a second so we can if you remember at CitizenCon last year, the Academy of Science Guild progression, you have these different professions within it. You've got hunters, explorer, the different mission types within these professions. So search and rescue, rescue person, and firefighting. So two different mission types within search and rescue. Firefighting and rescue person. And so those things are not necessarily mutually exclusive either. You could have firefighting involved in the rescue of a person. And so we'll talk about that. But let's listen.
For those who dream of exploring, I'm sure we have a couple here. We have the Academy of Sciences that was brought up yesterday in the social presentation, if you saw that. This is a science guild that will include factions like the Imperial Cartography Center, who will task you with a variety of missions to better understand our universe, such as sending you into a nebula to do deep scans, or finally seeing what's at the bottom of that planetary canyon. We're going to have a new faction called High Point Wilderness Specialists, who will offer missions associated with the various fauna that we're starting to get into the game, from population control missions to harvesting specific resources for research.
And so they don't specifically talk about the organization Rapid Response, but that's one of the organizations that you're going to be able to work for. And obviously there's going to be a whole lot more later on, but this is just for 1.0. This is just for the first 5 systems. And so let's talk about Rapid Response. This is a Lore Makers Community Questions. I forget when this one was. It's within the last couple of years because that's how long they've been doing these. Someone asked, what's life like in the emergency medicine profession? I'm interested in the lore behind medics and doctors of Star Citizen's verse. As we all know, the verse is a cold and dangerous world where death lurks around every corner. No, that's not true. That's not true. The verse, that's, pyro. But most of the verse is civilized and very, if you look at it from modern perspective, almost Western. It's only natural for hospital staff and paramedics to be up armored or even more respected, right? No. Again, no, that's not correct. Are they paid better than we would consider today? What's the EMS system look like? And are there any prominent individuals that pioneered emergency medicine for the future? Answer. Medicine occupies a really important place in both the verse and Star Citizen's gameplay. Again, medicine, gameplay. People keep just, regen's the answer. No, this was said post-regen. So again, medical gameplay is going to be very impactful. However, aspects of this topic, like how much medics and doctors earn, have more to do with design than lore. We'll lead that side of things to the design team. As for the lore, the portfolio on the Brentworth Care Centers offers some insight here. The answer is ultimately quite simple. First, most well-equipped hospitals are in larger cities and space stations, which have safety fail-safes in place to mitigate danger. Threats to the medical infrastructure of those areas would elicit an immediate response from the governing authority. Second, seeing hospital staff in armor would likely distress patients, undermining any medical organization's efforts to comfort their patients. It's no different than the Western world right now for the vast majority of places. That said, there are places like Pyro, where you will have hospitals and clinics that aren't necessarily like this. Of course, in a place where violent crime is rampant, like Grimhex, you would probably expect that the doctors and medical staff would have more weapons and armor on display or easily accessible. Next, you also asked about paramedics and emergency medical services. That's what we're talking about, search and rescue. There are many different kinds of emergency medical service providers in the verse. Some of them work for planetary governments, others for individual hospitals, and the vast majority of such groups are private companies that provide different specialties and/or zones of operations. So that's Rapid Response. And so Rapid Response is an emergency medical service, a private emergency medical service that would provide service in either specialty service for certain events or like job site medicine, and locations, you would have rapid response in pyro, but they just charge a whole lot more and be, and go all trauma team. And I'll explain why. But so if you are in, say, Stanton, or maybe you're in Terra, or you're in Castra, and you get injured, and you decide to have NPCs come and rescue you and take you back to a clinic or a hospital, you are most likely, depending on where you are in the system and everything, going to interact with the planetary government or hospital-based emergency medical service. Just like when we get dynamic server meshing, and you get attacked in orbit around Crusader, or Microtech, Microtech security will respond in their ships to come and do law enforcement. Well, Microtech Emergency Medical Services, if your ship is disabled and you're injured, then they come rescue you. If you are injured on a planet while you're mining or whatever, then Microtech Emergency Medical Services would come and get you and take you back to a hospital. And essentially it would be like what happens when you get downed right now, or if you just request transport because you're injured and you don't want to walk all the way back to your ship or something like that. You could get a free ambulance, not free, but an ambulance ride back to the hospital. But so that's the vast majority of such groups are private companies that provide different specialties and or zones of operation. So rapid response may provide disaster response. They may provide supplemental. So you could get missions in the future where you're around Microtech space, and because you're a civilian, they could say, "Hey, we just got tasked with this contract from Microtech Emergency Medical Services. They don't have any available responders, and so they called us. And so here's the contract. Here's the job. You may have a response that goes directly to a corporate location, or providing medical coverage, rescue coverage for Shubin mining ships in the air in Halo, something like that. You could be in Pyro, and Rapid Response could be the contractor for Pyro and Nyx, and they do the remote medical search and rescue out there in order to bring you back to a UEE station, or even all the way back to a UE hospital, or provide on-site medical services, where you pay extra to get healed on site. You could be doing the contract for that organization to do those sorts of things. How does SAR response time compare to EOD response time? You know what? I don't know. I mean, overseas, we try to maintain the golden hour, which is not really a thing anymore, especially in a LISCO environment. But yeah, that's an interesting question. For example, Rajora Rescue, a Tavaran volunteer organization providing free medical service to Tavaran communities around the verse, and using their efforts to help renew a sense of cultural pride and identity amidst their diaspora. Rajora Rescue will be a faction, an organization that you can work for in the future when we have Tavaran-based locations. Emergency medical responders, and this is important too, because this is alluding to gameplay. Lore equals gameplay. This is alluding to the gameplay related to rescue and medical missions. Emergency medical responders arm and armor themselves differently based on a number of factors, including their company and location of operation. Some are more specialized paramedics, but there's much more to emergency response than just medical treatment. And we're going to get into that. But so that would be part of your dispatch information. When you look at a contract, how they display the information in the Mission Manager app, and we'll talk about what that might look like and what information they might share, will determine, hey, do I want to take this mission? How much information do they have? How much of it is unknown? What information do they give me? And then how do I prepare for that mission? What equipment do I take with me? Because of what's known, or what known unknowns do we have? In the broader field of search and rescue, responders need the skills and gear to address and overcome many different disaster scenarios. As a result, they are far more likely to carry armor and weapons, along with multi-tools, fire extinguishers, and other more specific pieces of equipment, depending on the nature of the beacon they are responding to. We'll get to that. And we'll read this last bit just because. Lastly, you asked about notable individuals in the field of medicine. We'd be remiss not to mention Doctors Dio Nicolas and Ted Santos, who founded Bioticor, the cutting-edge medical manufacturer responsible for the creation of Calliope medicine. Now used widely throughout the UAE, it can efficiently perform massive bioreconstructive surgery that would have previously taken a team of surgeons multiple operations. The device is so effective it's been adapted for cosmetic surgeries. Plus, as mentioned in an earlier question, there's also Dr. Ibrahim, who changed the universe with his work on regeneration. There you have it. Medicine is always evolving, with new technologies rapidly challenging our understanding of what it means to live in the verse. Got a one-eyed, one-armed buddy who took the 200K bonus. Still kicking, so that is the true bonus. Yeah, definitely. In regards to rapid response and what they might do and how this works, and most people don't know this, especially those of us gamers, because we live in places with internet, we most of us are live in civilized areas, and so we don't know that there are companies like Remote Medical International, Global Rescue, Aspen Medical, and International SOS. Now, these are just four of the big ones that I know. Well, ones that I have interacted with. I've taught classes for their offshore and remote medics. I've interacted with them when I've been deployed overseas. But these are different companies that provide different medical and rescue solutions and services in outside of civilization, beyond civilization. Hence the picture. Sometimes it's providing clinics or even small hospitals. Let's see, where is it? Aspen Medical has actually a number of hospitals that they run in major cities of third world countries that specifically provide first world level care up to on site, as well as receiving people before in order to coordinate for evacuation back to the Western world for expats living and working in those countries and those regions. So these companies offer their own insurance. They provide for the rescue services, as well as the transport back to hospitals, in the civilized world. They provide on-site medical services. So when people, and this is the joke to me, and it really is a joke, when people say, I should have a regen capable bed on my Carrack because what happens if I die out in the verse? And it's like, well, the point is to not die. That should be the consequence of you being reckless and getting yourself killed is that you regen back at a hospital, back in civilization. The point is, if you are out on some exploration expedition, in a far-flung environment, you would have a medical support plan. And now and in the future, because we have rapid response, which is the 30th century equivalent of RMI, of Global Rescue, Aspen Medical, International SOS, is that these are companies that provide that medical and evacuation support plan to people, to organizations, to governments, anybody and everybody who is operating away from civilization and civilized medical care. Here we go. So that's what this is all about. And so if you imagine that we have rapid response in 1.0, providing these services, in areas that are not serviced by governmental agencies. And so at 1.0, they will probably fake it. If you are a player and you call for NPCs, Aspen Medical Support Services, we get you in the clear once the check clears, 100%. Yeah, it is a pay up front. But this is who you'd be doing missions for. It is probably, in a lot of instances, it is not who would be coming to rescue you, depending on where, if you're in Terra, on Terra, if you're in, on a planet in Stanton, you'll get magicked away back to a hospital, and the bill, you will pay a bill to Microtech Emergency Services, Microtech, Brentworth Care Center, whatever. That's where the UEC will go. But if, in terms of doing contracts and missions and earning rep with the Academy of Science Guild, you will be working via rapid response. And so you would be seeing these contracts come through, and they would be dispatching you and giving you information about these contracts. And those that information and the way you're dispatched would tell you about the nature of that contract. And the nature of that contract will also is what will tell you, what could tell you what gameplay you're expecting, what things you need to be able to do, what equipment you need to have, how that mission will play out, whether you need to bring some friends, what supplies you need, whether your ship is appropriate, or whether your ship using okay, I've got a Anvil C8R with a tier 3 bed. Okay, I'm not going to be able to do this mission that the client wants us to treat on site, and they expect they told us they have multiple patients with severe injuries. Well, if they've got severe injuries, you can't heal them. You can only stabilize them. So maybe you can't take that mission. Or you take a lesser payout because you stabilize and then transport them back to a clinic with a tier 2 bed for tier 2 injuries, or a hospital with a tier 1 bed for tier 1 injuries. That's what those things are going to dictate, and that's what will come in the dispatch information. Did you get any triple canopy offers or similar? It was so much money for a 25-year-old. I forget the name of the company. It was whoever bought Triple Canopy. I got an offer with them to be a security team medic for one of their State Department teams in Iraq in 2014. And I was about to go, and then ISIS kicked off, and they stopped. They put an immediate freeze on hirings, and then by the time they started rehiring in Iraq for that position, Constellus, I was like, nope, I'm on to bigger and better things. And I had also I had a conditional job offer for a position in 2015. I forget the name of the company. It was with Global Rescue. Global Rescue had a contract with I forget the name of the organization, but the organization had Global Rescue was providing the medics to an organization that was providing the security details for a NATO subgroup, or no, it was a UN subgroup that was monitoring the ceasefire zone in and around Crimea and eastern Ukraine. And so I got a conditional job offer from that. And then shit kicked off again over there, and there was no more ceasefire, so they didn't need anyone to monitor the ceasefire zone. After that, I was like, nope, I'm going to go be a flight medic, and have since not looked into any of that. I wish those opportunities had panned out, just because the experience would have been really cool and the money really great. Holy fuck. They're going to pay me $275K a year tax-free to be a security team medic with Constellus. And the Ukraine job was $180 a year tax-free, but for less time overseas. It was shorter deployments and less of them. So when it comes to the dispatching, and this is why what made me think about all this was Gilly, and thinking about, okay, you could have a dispatcher, doing comms calls like Gilly from Rapid Response, who you look at the contract and it gives you the the written information on the contract, and then when you accept the contract, you get a comms call from their dispatcher, like Gilly, saying, "Hey, thanks for taking this contract. We're short on pilots, we're short on medics, something like that. We really could use your help." And they give you a brief summary, a verbal summary of what you just read, in order to reiterate. Because do gamers read? Do you motherfuckers read? No, you don't. You come to me and Paul and Space Tomato to read for you. That's why we read the monthly reports. But so to reiterate in a brief summary, the pertinent information, so that way people don't jump into these missions half-cocked. Yeah, Naz reads the long runs. But this is what dispatch codes look like for civilian EMS here in the United States. And so you have you get a level, a priority level based off of these alphabet codes, and sort of the nature of the call. And so you see these lines, and a alpha level response means that you would get a single BLS resource, basic life support. So an alpha level response, you would, in your mission information would say, hey, we've got a call about a fall victim at this outpost with minor injuries, and they're requesting transport to this station for definitive medical treatment. And so you could hop in your Anvil C8R, with a tier 3 bed, and you fly out there and you bring the person hobbles into your Anvil C8R, and you treat their symptoms with your med bed, you stabilize the injury, you fly them, and then they, now that they have their pain taken care of, they hobble a little bit less. When you get to the space station, you land in a hangar, and they walk over to the hospital clinic freight elevator thing with the gurney, and they disappear. Mission complete, and you get your payout. That would be like an ALS or an alpha level response. But you could have a Bravo response would get you. Usually, this is when you don't know too much about the nature of the call. You don't have anything telling you that it's more severe, needing higher capability, but you also don't have enough information. And so you get multiple units responding just in case. And usually it gives you the ability, it says you can go lights and sirens, you can run hot. But a lot of us, don't. Simply because I'm not going to run lights and sirens if I don't have enough information to justify it. But if you have, you say, okay, it tells you that you don't know enough. You just say you got one patient, but you don't know the nature of the patient. So you could still go in your Anvil C8R, but you may end up getting there and finding a patient with a tier 1 injury. The probability would be low because you'd be more likely to know that they have a tier 1 injury than they're severely injured, but it could still happen. So it's a risk. And you would still be able to fly out there and stabilize with your tier 3 bed, but you wouldn't get the full payout because you wouldn't be able to, and remember, for these rescue missions, you're probably, and we'll talk about it later, but in the mission, it would probably dictate to you whether they want you to treat on site or treat and transport. And that will also determine what you bring. Hey, if it says treat on site and you know that you've got a Delta level call, okay, well, you need to go there with a Delta level call. They've got tier 1 injuries and they tell you multiple patients. Okay, well, you need at least one tier 1 bed if they're asking you to treat on site. Preferably more for multiple patients. So that determines whether you pick up that call. That's that progression through the system. And Charlie could say, again, that would be more like, you have a patient with a tier 2 injury. But tier 2 injuries, in the future may progress to tier 1 injuries. So you need to go with a tier 2 bed, in order to mitigate that injury, in order to treat those symptoms. All this will depend on how medical gameplay advances. But this is just talking about the nature and severity of the patients, and this doesn't tell you anything about the nature of the call, and so we get a lot of that information just verbally from dispatch, but it doesn't go into the coding of the call in dispatch. Now, how we do get that information is in the military with a 9-line medevac. Now, obviously, this is a lot of information, and you wouldn't need most of this. A lot of times we get abbreviated 9 lines. But you would, if you got your mission information, you could probably get a brief code and number of patients. Like in line 5, we get number of patients. We also get number of patients by precedence, so urgency, we get that in line 3. But if you look at the 9-line and response determinants, it's what I expect that they would do in the narrative paragraph that no one would read in the mission manager would a blend of this and a 9-line to tell you what you're getting yourself into. And JJ did tie buckle. So obviously you don't, the location would be written in there. We get the locations of our missions right now. But you have to think with radar and scanning, and the way, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. And this happens a lot in search and rescue. It happens frequently in helicopter EMS and even civilian, EMS running on an ambulance. You get dispatched to a general area because you don't have, a 10-digit grid or a street address. You get a witness report, that's third hand or something like that, and you're like, you have to go investigate. Well, the same thing would happen if, you're doing these search and rescue missions, and with the development of radar and scanning, which again is that holistic system between vehicles and characters, players, you could get dispatched, and part of the nature of the mission, it might tell you you're going to this exact location, or it can tell you we have a report of this in this area, but we don't know where exactly they are. And so it could be a crashed ship and you don't have the exact location. It could be a disabled ship out in space. It could be some people working outside of an outpost or near a cave or in a cave. The nature will that information will tell you, okay, and that will give you a zone and how that will look like on the UI on the star map. But you have to go there, and essentially you'd have to use the new FPS radar or the new vehicle radar and scan system to do a scan wave to look for POI, points of interest, and then be like, okay, well, I did the scan wave thing, and I've got 3 pings here, here, and here, and now I need to go check those out to figure out which one is the location that I'm looking for. And maybe you get to one and it's just some debris from another wreck, or it's some space rocks or something like that, or it's another ship that's mining and has nothing to do with your call. But then you get to the third one down the line, and aha, there we go. Now we found the damaged ship, the disabled ship, the ship that's on fire, whatever. Or the wrecked ship on the surface, and that's where we need to go to then look for our victims. Line 2, you're not going to get radio frequency and call sign. You don't need that. Sometimes you'll have a number of patients. Sometimes you don't. If it's a vague report, and that's part of the nuance. That's part of this is a fake call, just another tank junkie. Yeah. But that's part of the challenge of the mission is sometimes you'll know exactly what you're getting into and you can really prepare for it. And a lot of times you don't, and you just have to make do and do the best you can with what you got once you get there. And that might mean mission failure for you. And that's part of the building of tension of going to something. If you go someplace and your report, both in the part you read as well as what you get dispatched from the dispatcher says, "Hey, we've got a report of a disabled ship that was attacked in this general area. We don't the call was garbled, but it sounds like they have multiple severe they could have potentially multiple severe injuries. We don't know if the pirates are on site or not. We don't have an exact location." And so you don't have an exact location. You don't know how many patients you have. You don't know the severity of their injuries. You don't know the state of their ship, and what that will entail in just for you to get access to those patients. You don't know if there are, let's see, where is it? Line 6, if there's enemy in the area, the possible, known, none. So all that sort of stuff would build a whole lot of tension, and then could very well surprise you, and lead to mission failure, or leading you to do something that we do frequently, not frequently, but we do in civilian EMS, is call for additional resources, because you get there and you're like, this is not as reported at all, and I need help. I don't have the resources to manage this. So are you standing up your own in-game services? Are you asking me personally, or are you asking, what are we doing in this mission? But that's what the 9 line is about, and what you get in the contract, and the mission manager would give you either would address the things in here that you would be relevant to gameplay, whether it's either it's known or it's unknown. And when it's known, it would give you some of that information. Asking if you're going to make your own med runners. Am I going to make my own org? I don't have any intention of making my own org. I won't have any time for that for a long time. Would I like to join an org like that? Yes. But at the same time, I'm much more interested in PvE content. So I'd like to do that content with an org, just because it's more fun doing that sort of thing, especially because a lot of this stuff would be team and group gameplay. Teams of 2, 3, groups of 4 or more, in order to get this stuff done. I'm not interested in providing these services to another org who's involved in a PvP war. Maybe later on down the line. It's just not my bag. Um, Maybe doing it for players who are engaged in PvE content. Absolutely. A player puts up a beacon, because they're out doing a mission. Yeah, sure. But I am very much interested in doing this sort of content PvE, because when we talk about the modularity of the mission system, how all these things change based off what's known, what's unknown, what actually occurs is a different module that they have plugged into the mission, essentially at random, but also based off of things occurring within Star Sim, and oh gosh, the probability volumes that would determine how these modules of the mission get plugged in, and what you would find in what locations. You would find a lot more of the simpler, more alpha level calls in Terra, around Terra Prime, or around Microtech. Whereas in Pyro, you're going to get a lot more Delta level calls. Now, will you get Delta level calls in Stanton? Sure. There's gonna be disaster type things that will happen on stations and at distribution centers and stuff, where you've got multiple severe patients. You don't know how many. They are. There's a fire and there's leaking radiation and chemicals, all that sort of stuff. And that will be just as challenging as going to a war zone with wounded. But I think that these sort of things would be more likely to happen. Not more of them in terms of volume, but more likely in terms of percentage of occurrence out of the total call volume, in a place called Pyro, where it's very combat heavy. But yeah, so this is how you would get the sort of information you would get in your mission, and then you can imagine how the comms call would come through in order, and how the dispatcher would explain this to you. And they could, it wouldn't be a lot of recording in order to do these things, in order to get the variety that they need. It's not a ton of lines. Mostly your EMS calls will be because some junkie flopped in front of a mini ball. I mean, that would be kind of funny. You get overdose calls in Grim Hex, and even in cities, off the beaten path, in Lorville and Area 18, you go down an alleyway and stuff, and though a lot of times those are bravos, because you're like, there's a guy who, I can't tell if he's sleeping or if he's overdosed. It looked like he was breathing, and we call that a bravo. And you go check it out. So we talked about the location of the pickup site, and how your location, you might not, you probably would frequent, especially, with the nature of the space-based ones, but even on the planet-based ones, a lot of times unless you're going to a specific point of interest that's known, where you'd have an organization or a group requesting help at that location, you wouldn't know the exact location. And so let's listen to what they talked about at CitizenCon 2953 about how vehicle radar and scanning, what their plans are. Let's see, we'll turn off that.
Let's talk a little bit more about the future of scanning, if people are interested in hearing about that. So what is the future of scanning? We'll touch on it lightly. At the moment, there are two main ways for you to interact with the scanning gameplay loops. The first one's obviously the scan, and the second one's the ping system. And both of these are going to be merged into a single system known as a scan wave. When you send the scan wave out, if you get any successful pings, what will happen is it will immediately populate your HUD with an AR marker, giving you information about what you've been able to scan, as well as starting to give you far more interesting information than you get now, rather than just the name of the ship. The underlying system will work on the signature system, similar to what it does today, and there are two main scans. There is the quick scan. The quick scan is just a low version of it. It has a very small impact on your own signal output, so if you want to stay a little bit more covert and potentially not be seen looking at something you shouldn't, you can use that one instead. The main benefits are small increase to your actual passive detection range, as well as being able to detect things that maybe are a little fainter than you should be able to see. This has a decent amount of cutting through interference, but not phenomenal. The other version is the charge scan. The charge scan is the big scan. Now, this will actually allow you to detect things up to quantum boost range, which is way, way further than the current passive detection range. And not only that, but it'll actually drop a marker allowing you to jump straight to that location for whatever it is that you found. Now, you don't want to be jumping in blind. And as I said, it's going to give you way more information than it did before. Some examples, but not limited to this, are things like whatever it is it charging a quantum drive? Is it firing? Is the shields generating? Does it have any shields? Is it perhaps charging an EMP? Maybe it's got a snare up trying to catch you. It gives you that additional information so you can make the decision whether you actually want to get to that location. That's just a brief glimpse into the future of scanning and what our vision is for it.
So, with that information, knowing what we know, if you got dispatched to an area, and it's just like anything else in an MMO where you need to go search an area and you just walk around, uncovering the grayed out zone. But you'd have to go to an area and you'd have to do your scan wave in order to then, find the points of interest that you could then quantum boost to. And then, you quantum boost and you get there and you're like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Well, now you have found the location. And so once you find the location and you get to it, you get an update from dispatch and you'd be like, okay, sweet, that's that's the ship we're looking for. Or, you found the victims down there on the planet. Good job. Like say if it's a ship or something, they would update you and be like, okay, go ahead and approach that ship and let's scan it so we can figure out what we're looking, scan it for life signs, find out what we're looking for. And that would tell you, the state of the ship. Is it disabled? Is it intact? Is there atmosphere on board? Is there gravity? It might tell you, okay, I've got three life signs. Maybe it would give you, I know that there's 3, potentially 5 more, or something like, maybe it gives you a range because it can't tell. Maybe that's something that having the right type of radar/scanner would help with. And, once you get that information, it would progress along the mission. And then they tell you, okay, now we need to, say it's a derelict ship out in space, a disabled ship out in space, or maybe it's even intact. And, now the dispatcher says, okay, good job scanning the target ship. Now we need to, find a way aboard. And now it's up to you. This actually we're out of order. So I did this video a couple years ago about boarding actions in Star Citizen. And this part right here isn't just related to the boarding actions, but it's really relevant to accessing the patient. And they talked about this back in the Lore Makers community questions, as well as hinted at it in the description of the rescue and transport missions. So rescuing imperiled clients. And then they mention In the broader field of search and rescue, responders need the skills and gear to address and overcome many different disaster scenarios. As a result, they are far more likely to carry armor and weapons, along with multi-tools, fire extinguishers, and other more specific pieces of equipment, depending on the nature of the beacon they're responding to. So if you know the nature of the beacon, you know that you need a cutting tool. If you know that they're deep in a facility, you might want the two-handed one versus the one-handed one, or you might need to bring more batteries. If you get a report that tells you that the ship is on fire or there's a fire at the facility that has caused multiple casualties, you're going to bring firefighting equipment. You're going to wear a suit that protects you from fire and heat better. But if you don't know that information, you're not going to find out until you get there. And start doing some scanning. And so you have to hope that you came prepared. Otherwise, you might have to find a different way of doing it or call for help, call for additional resources. So when I did this video about boarding actions, I looked at some of these tools that we could use not only for rescue missions, but for anything where you need to gain access to an area. How do I get aboard? We've talked about the why of boarding actions. Now it is time to talk about the how. Earlier, we briefly touched on some of the deliverables in development, some of them being directly related to how you'd make entry into the target ship, station, or facility. Whether you're hacking, cutting, or breaching, the method you use to reach the interior of the target is largely based on what the mission parameters are, and of course, personal preference, as well as what equipment is available. Just like in many other games you've played, there may be missions where you have to remain undetected, or where the opposing force is so overwhelming that being detected would go badly for you. Hacking or cutting may be the better option then. You could have a mission where time and speed are of the essence, and then breaching and rapid entry are preferred. A rescue mission for a friendly target may only require that you supply an airlock with power in order for it to function and for you to make entry. Technique is largely situation dependent. So it doesn't, even in a non-combat situation, it's situation dependent on what you need to do. If the ship is intact or it's powered, but the crew is, downed and out or something, you may need to just force the door, or maybe you can just hack the door in order to get aboard the ship. Maybe it's a space station. Maybe it's a distribution center. Any number of things. The doors could be broken. There could be collapsed debris in front of them. All these different things would be in between you and getting to your patient. And you may know that, generally there are victims back here, and I've done a scan, an FPS scan, and I can tell that they're back this way and I need to get there. But I've got these obstacles in the way. I've got these things that are preventing me from getting there. And so you're going to need these types of tools in order to gain access. And it won't be in every mission, but, depending on what dispatch information you get, will determine how prepared you get, and whether you want to take an alpha level call, and just go with your ship and your med gun and maybe some pens, and or you want to take a delta level call with it's a MCI, mass casualty incident, with unknown severity of injuries, and the atmosphere is vented out of the ship and there's radiation leaking, blah blah blah. That builds a whole lot of tension just in the dispatch. That's part of the job. That's one of the things that gets everybody all adrenaline junkied up, is knowing, hey, we're going into this situation. Holy shit, this is serious. And we've got, a really sick or injured person, or multiples of them. And so that builds that tension, especially if you have a dispatcher. It's one thing if the dispatcher in the comms call is giving you a sort of laissez-faire, it's just an alpha level call, easy peasy, easy money. But, they could be doing some really good voice acting and face acting and really dispatching those Delta and Echo level calls with some seriousness, and encouraging rapidity. And so, now either before and or after you've made entry to the location, you've accessed the location. Well, you also need to locate the patients. So, okay, sweet. We found the location. Maybe it's a building, maybe it's a ship, maybe it's a cave or a ravine, and you have to find a way to traverse the terrain to get down there safely. That could be something where we end up needing jetpacks or some sort of zip line tool, in the future. But once you use those sort of things to gain access to where the patients are, but you also have to find out where they are. And so also at CitizenCon 2953, we got a brief glimpse at FPS radar and scanning, which again, they're working on in conjunction as part of that holistic system. And these are two of the biggest parts of what would be involved in a good rescue mission is vehicle radar and scanning in order to find the scene of the call, because the best ones wouldn't give you a fixed location, or I think the best ones wouldn't. It adds more gameplay if you're having to scan to find the dang place. But then using not having a specific marker that tells you, like right now with our investigation missions, it tells you to investigate these points. Okay, that's lame. But once you have FPS radar and scanning, okay, sweet, I made entry to this 890 jump. Now I need to find the bodies, and okay, I'm doing my scan wave from my FPS radar in order to, okay, it tells me that there's someone over here. I'm too far away to know that they're alive or dead. Or I got a scan here in the hangar and there's nothing. I need to proceed deeper into the ship or in a distribution center. And I'm like, okay, I'm close enough that I can tell that there is an injured person at the end of this hallway, but I don't know how severe their injury is. Or maybe depending on how, what suit you're wearing, can detect, it can detect whether they're alive or dead, and depending on it can detect at a further distance the severity of their injury to help with triage, because that's another big thing. Is the nature of these missions could get really cool with multiple patients if you're like, okay, I've got my you're doing your terrapin rescue terrapin, and you only have one tier 2 bed. Okay, well, now you need, and you've got reports of multiple patients with varying injuries. You want to find the most severe injuries first in order to stabilize those before you go and grab the less injured people. If you want to, kind of like, traditional rescue missions in MMOs where, you've got 6 patients, or after you scan, it says, okay, you've got 6 patients. If you want the full payout, you got to help all 6. If you go grab the 3 greens before you even get to a red, and the red dies before you get to them, well, now you only rescued 3 and you only get a partial payout. So that's where the radar and scanning could come in, and having specialized suits and armor is helping you with the A, locating the patients, and B, determining the nature of the patients to help you triage them. So you do a scan, you find 3 of them, and you're okay. Well, this one's I've got a green over here and a red over here and a yellow over here. I'm gonna go take the red first, and then I'll come back for the yellow, and then I'll go get the green, in order to get that max payout. Or if you have multiple people, maybe you are equipped as a full-on medic, but your friends only have a paramed device and some extrication equipment. Okay, have them go grab the lower acuity patients. You go grab the higher acuity patient.
Now we fixed the damage, we need to find the enemies that caused it. While we're on the way, you'll notice that the on-foot emissions at the top of the screen. We're emitting infrared, electromagnetic radiation, and also sound. If any of these go higher than the background levels, it will be easier for the enemies to detect us. Let's take a look at the bad guy's bone. As part of the emissions and radar tech, we also have the ability to scan while we're on foot. If we tap the button, we can do a quick scan to reveal everything to reveal info about anything that's in our view currently. Okay, Bone, let's do a quick scan. This highlights whatever's in our line of sight. There's also some risk and reward to the scanning system. By holding the button, we
So that quick scan could allow you to be like, okay, I've got multiple victims right here. And rather than having to go up and scan with your med gun, each one to determine what injuries they have, you could do, if you have got the appropriate medical suit or armor, it could do a quick scan and at least give you a color. Because that's something that we do in triage when you have a mass casualty incident, multiple patients, is you use a very simplified system. You're not doing a detailed assessment. You're just doing the absolute basics to determine is this person severely injured, moderately injured, or minimally injured. And that's something I think that would be appropriate within the remit of a medical suit, is to be able to do that scan wave and just give you put a color over that person that's laying there on the ground. Are they red, orange, or green, or red, orange, or yellow? Something like that. Red, orange, or green. I don't know. So another thing, when we talked about tools, we talked about hacking. We talked about the thing that forces the door open. We talked about breaching charges, which would blow it open, cutting. The other thing that you have to worry about in search and rescue missions is, you have to gain access to the patient. You have to extricate the patient from the environment, and that means not only getting past those obstacles, and getting the patient past those obstacles, but there's also environmental threats. And so the obvious environmental threat, from the 9 line, is enemy in the area. Are the pirates still there? Are the Vandal still there? And as the medic, are you going to neutralize them, or are you going to try and sneak your patients out? Or did you bring security with you? Hopefully, you did. Otherwise, are you, prepared to handle it yourself, or do you have to wait for people, again, call for assistance? But now we have not only the radiation zones in game right now, and so you can imagine a lot of the industrial facilities, even the space stations and ships could have leaking radiation due to damage from power plants. And so with engineering and resource network, anytime your power plant gets damaged aboard your ship, it could start leaking, to a certain extent, it could start leaking radiation and create radiation zones that could cause injuries that require healing. That's already a thing now, but also create a hazard for you to navigate in game. But we also know that fire is going to be coming soon. We also know that you have the life support system, and so that's another hazard. Does your patient have to, in order to get back to your ship, do they have, is there a breathable atmosphere, or are they wearing the right equipment? How do you get them back? Or is their suit, empty of air, and do you need to resupply them with air to get them back to the ship? So let's watch a little bit about fire.
Together.
A fire that is left unchecked will spread throughout your ship. And if it does this, and it reaches your ship components,
System is offline.
then you'll be having a very bad day. And this could lead to your ship being both crippled or destroyed. So this means you will be able to put out fires using a fire extinguisher. Where possible, we have made sure that fire extinguishers are readily available throughout our ships.
The extinguishers, they're very simple to use. They are point and shoot. You have to be careful that you don't start flailing wildly with your extinguisher. If you have to aim at the base of your fire and then keep it there to cool down the surface and take away enough of the heat and the oxygen so that the fire calms down. There will be a temperature readout where you can see how strong the fire is still where you're aiming.
And you need to keep your finger on the trigger until it actually goes out. Fires can just be smoking there, and technically it's very close to being on fire. So you really do want to make sure it's really out before you move on, because if you just leave them smoking and then go wandering off, there's a good chance it will heat up again and catch fire again. It's worth knowing that a fire extinguisher has a limited amount of ammo within it. To your benefit, you can also take your fire extinguishers back to where they are stored, plug them in, and then they will recharge their ammo. However, it is important to know that if your ship doesn't have a functioning life support at this moment, the recharge will not work.
If you
Thank you. Sorry about that. So all the things to consider in just accessing the people that needing rescue, because sometimes you'll know the exact location, sometimes you won't. If you don't know it, you have to go find it. And once you find it, then you you may have the exact location of the patient. They may be part of the difficulty of the call.
Part of the crew, part of the ship.
Halifaxan, thanks so much for the follow. Really appreciate it. But that could be one of the things. It could be a lower level call, gives you a lower level payout. More of a newer player rescue mission, gives you the exact point of interest location wherever they are, and gives you, once you get there, gives you a marker for the person, because it's at a known location with the person who called it in is there with them and stuff, and they can direct you right to that patient. And then you can take them back to your ship and either treat them on site or treat and transport them to a hospital or clinic. But a lot of these higher level missions, as you progress within this profession, would give you more and more gameplay and more challenges within different aspects of gameplay during the mission that would dictate that payout. Now, if you guys remembered that when they were doing the cargo mission development and the payout for those, they had that algorithm thing that dictated the payout, based off of how much cargo and how far you're going, and if there's danger, blah, blah, blah. Well, they could use a similar algorithm system in order to dictate the payout that would be structured based off the mission, and the number of things that you have to do that contributes to the amount of difficulty, that contributes to the amount of preparedness and potential supplies that you would use. And so it would scale appropriately, whether you're going to a known location with a known patient of a low-level injury to a unknown location with an unknown number of patients with unknown threats, and or environmental hazards, and unknown access to the patient. All of that stuff makes for a much higher payout, much more difficult, and potentially, in my opinion, would be really fun to do in a co-op environment, where you spread out those tasks among people in a team, just like we do in real life. If I'm, I was a firefighter for years, and the engine crew, everybody on the engine has different tasks when you get to a fire, when you get to a wreck, a car wreck. If we go to, go on a SAR mission or something like that, everybody has a different role. And it also dictates what you're carrying. So you have, one person carrying a two-handed cutter. Another person has some breaching charges in their backpack. One person is prepared to hack. You've got a fully fledged medic. Everybody has some first aid supplies. You've got your ship configured. Maybe you take two ships. Maybe you take a medical ship and then, a ship that provides combat escort, as well as like a Hornet. What's the Hornet? What's the Hornet that has the radar? Oh gosh, brain fart. Anyway, you know what I mean. You structure it based off of what you get in your dispatch information, how you go prepared for that mission, and then your payout scales accordingly. So after you've gone through all that, you've gotten your mission, you've prepared for your mission, you've made your way to the location, you've made your way through the location to where the patients are, navigating the obstructions and the hazards and the threats, and now you finally get to your patient. Well, I'm not going to talk a lot about medical gameplay because this is more. I wanted to talk more about the search and rescue aspect of it, simply because these are things that we just talked about are known things for Star Citizen. These are known knowns. We know that we're getting FPS and vehicle radar and scanning that will do these things, and that that's how it will work for other missions, for other aspects of gameplay, so they can be easily applied in a modular mission system to rescue missions. What we don't know is how the further iterations of medical gameplay will work. We know what we have. We know that healing will take resources. And so that's part of your planning is you will, based off of whatever information you have about the number of patients and the number of injuries could determine what resources you take, as well as saying if you do get information that says, hey, the requester is asking you to heal on site. Thank you, Hornet Tracker. So you could be going to a distribution center for Kovalex, and they said, hey, we've got some deadlines to meet, and we had an accident down in the cargo area, and we've got 5 injured people with mild to moderate injuries. Can you come heal them on site so they can get back to work? Or maybe that's a more of a Hurston Dynamics thing. I don't know. We can't, or they can't afford the downtime of them being extracted to a hospital or clinic. And so that would tell you that you would say, okay, I likely need more resources to do the full-on healing of these injuries on site versus what I would need to treat their symptoms, to stabilize their injuries, because that's what should be the differentiation, is if you are just stabilizing the injuries and then transporting them to a hospital for definitive treatment, it should take far less resources. And that could be information that you get at the beginning of the call. That could be information that you get once you locate and diagnose the patients, once you have scanned them and figured out the nature of their injuries. The dispatcher comes over and he says, okay, now that we've got that information, Shub and Interstellar is saying that we need you, is asking you to stabilize them and transport them to this station that they own so they can treat them. Or they could say that Shubin is saying, hey, they've authorized you to treat on site. And so now you go ahead and treat on site. And that could be part of the mission. And maybe, they say, authorize you to treat on site if you have the resources. And if you don't, okay, well, you don't get the payout for treating on site. And that would be a bonus payment. But now you can still transport them, on your medical ship back to a hospital or clinic, and you can still get paid, but you don't get the bonus payment for doing what they asked. Because that's a thing that these places will do, that they will offer as part of their packages and say, hey, we've sent people out to check on you, and they've diagnosed you with this, and we can bring you back to civilization, or we can bring you these resources and we can treat you on site. And companies and agencies and governments and individuals will say, I'm all the way out here. I don't want to go all the way back and then have to all the way come back here. I don't want to start over again. And players especially would say that, but these NPC missions would do the same thing. You get no guns, so don't shut up. But that's the big differentiation. Now, the other aspects of the medical gameplay, I think, is, and this is me speculating, because right now, as far as I'm aware and from what I can tell, because obviously, like, we don't get we do get injuries more often than we did before, but it's still not a lot, and there's still going to be a lot of balancing left to do. But right now, the you don't need to stabilize a tier 3 injury. There's no stabilization needed. But tier 2 and tier 1 injuries do require stabilization, but you can stabilize all injuries at a tier 3 bed. Whether that will stay that way, we don't know. What stabilization is going to entail in comparison to medical gameplay, we don't know. But I think that for medical missions, especially for the ones where you are going to be treating and transporting, and I think that should be the majority of medical missions because that's the most likely outcome for most search and rescue right now. And I imagine that would be most likely, more often than not, in most missions in the game. Is they want to treat and they want you to be transported back to a hospital for definitive care. And the reason we do that now is because it's far more cost effective than to bring the resources to heal a severe injury out to the field. Now, again, if the requester authorizes that, sweet, and you're prepared, boom, you just got a big old bonus payment, but that means you made the investment up front to have those resources to be able to heal those severe injuries. But I think they're going to have to put a lot of emphasis on stabilization of injuries and differentiate that gameplay enough to incentivize players to use it, not only for themselves, but also for missions. And I think that's probably going to be how they differentiate those missions, in that they don't give you the option for these NPC missions to heal on site. They say no, that they don't want you to heal on site. They want you to treat and transport them, and they won't give you the option to heal them, or they won't authorize payment. And so if you heal them, it's like, okay, well, you just gave away a bunch of resources for free. But that's another part of that mission, is if they don't authorize treatment on site for a severe injury, you have to stabilize them. And I think that they need to differentiate stabilization based off of bed tier. And if you don't have a tier 1 bed, you can't stabilize a tier 1 injury. But if you have a tier 2 bed, you can delay the effects of that injury. You can slow, that countdown for them. I think that would be a better way, because that way, having the appropriate ship with the appropriate beds in order to provide transport to give you time to get them back to the right facility would be the right thing. Because I do think they need to go back to having tier 2 beds at space stations, not having them everywhere. That way, if you have a tier 1 injury and you have a tier 2 bed, okay, sweet, we need to get you all the way back to New Babbage. And that'll be a little bit of a trip. But you have to do the stabilization gameplay, and maybe you have to continue to stabilize them en route. Because that would be really cool gameplay and incentivize multi-crew, in that you've got your medical terrapin. If you fly it solo and you've got a patient with a tier 1 injury, you have to continue to stabilize over time. Every few minutes you have to do more stabilization in order to keep the injury from progressing while you're en route back to the hospital with that tier 1 bed. If you want that higher level payout, because you kept their severe injury from progressing, you need to have a second person to continue to provide that medical care, unless while you're flying, unless you're going to get out of the seat. And do it, and you'd only be able to do that in quantum. Well, if you're only quantuming for short periods of time, the rest of the time you're actively flying. And so I think, again, that's how things work in real life. I don't just stabilize someone and then just set it and forget it. I mean, some patients are like that. They're easier to stabilize, but the most severe patients, I'm constantly monitoring, constantly making changes, and it's stressful and it's a lot of work. It's also engaging, and it would make for very engaging gameplay if you have to constantly monitor these patients to keep them from progressing from a severe injury to death, or a severe injury to downed, or a severe leg injury worsens and creates another leg injury or something like that. I don't know how they want to do it. There's more to do with medical gameplay, but I think that's ultimately the where rescue missions need to go in order to make them engaging, in order to make them challenging, and make your palms a little bit sweaty, give you a little bit of threat. You've got a timer. It's almost like doing the cargo missions with the cargo that goes not just not just Quantanium, but there's other volatile cargoes where if they're not they can only be out of that stable environment for so long before they go boom. Well, this is essentially that same thing, but it's a character. It is now out of that. It's out of that stable environment. You have found them. You have diagnosed them, and now they can proceed to boom. The countdown can go down if you don't continue to keep them stabilized, and if you don't have the right bed, that countdown will progress faster, or you'll have a shorter time. And so, we need to fly fast. And then you have to land in the hangar and put them in that little thing, and essentially it acts like a freight elevator, and mission complete, burrito I eat. But yeah, so and also that dictates knowing what hospitals and clinics provide what level of service. If you take a patient with a tier 1 injury to a clinic with a tier 2 bed, and again, I want that to be changed. Tier 1 beds only at major hospitals, tier 2 beds at clinics, because it doesn't make sense to have a tier 1 bed at a urgent care in a space station, or maybe eventually the right medical ship that you could deliver them to, because you've got that could be part of your continuum of gameplay. Is you're taking these missions in your Anvil C8R and you're bringing patients back to your galaxy with medical module. But that's another part of you have to know where you can take those patients to. That's part of my job, is knowing what hospitals have what capabilities. And if I take the patient, a patient to a hospital that doesn't have the capability to take care of them, it's a big fuck up on my part. And so if you take a patient with a tier 1 injury to a clinic with a tier 2 bed, okay, well, you'll get paid. They're going to have to transfer them to another hospital, but you get a lower payout. Zeta Polonide, thank you very much. Yeah, I think there's that one, maybe one more, but that's the one I remember from Xenothreat. A lot of different elements within these rescue missions that provide a lot of variety in terms of the scale and scope of the mission, the payout of the mission in terms of UEC and reputation, the number of people that you bring with you, and how you and your team prepare, what ship you use, as well as the tension for the amount of tension for the mission. And sometimes you might just have a little while and you just want to do some chill medical missions that are not much more than a chill hauling mission gameplay. But maybe you're in the mood for something engaging and kind of stressful, and that requires some preparation and planning and cooperative gameplay. All of these things and all these different modules that Elliot and team could build into this archetype of mission could provide a whole lot of variety and a lot of interesting things to a lot of people, not just people who want to do the medical gameplay. But yeah, that's all I have for this Scanner Anomaly. I'm going to switch back to